Good morning, Faith Bible family, and welcome to week 15 of our Psalms on the Porch series. This morning we're looking at Psalm 29. This is, I think, one of Peterson's finest compositions. The psalm itself is beautiful Hebrew poetry in its own right, and the NIV and other modern translations do a fine job of bringing out the beauty in the language, but Peterson adds a different kind of touch that I think does it extremely well. In English, our most common poetic devices are meter and rhyme. And while Hebrew poetry does use both of these devices from time to time, the most common device used in Hebrew poetry is parallelism. Parallelism is when a poet puts two or more lines together that emphasize a common theme or a sentiment. And this poem is a beautiful example of just this kind of device. Peterson's translation brings out this parallelism brilliantly, while also adding in other devices that are common in English poetry. It's a great synthesis of both kinds of styles. We'll discuss more about this in a second, but for now, we're in Psalm 29, so let's read it together.
Bravo, God, bravo. Gods and all angels shout encore. In awe before the glory, in awe before God's visible power. Stand at attention, dress your best to honor him. God thunders across the waters, brilliant, his voice and his face streaming brightness. God across the floodwaters. God's thunder tympanic, God's thunder symphonic. God's thunder smashes cedars, God topples the northern cedars. The mountain ranges skip like wild colts, the high ridges jump like wild kid goats. God's thunder spits fire, God thunders, the wilderness quakes, he makes the desert of Kadesh shake. God thunder sets the oak trees dancing, a wild dance whirling, the pelting rain stripping their branches. We fall to our knees and we call out glory. Above the floodwaters is God's throne, from which his power flows, from which he rules the world. God makes his people strong. God gives his people peace.
Hopefully you were a little bit more alert this morning to be looking for the parallelism as you heard the psalm. Did you hear it? God's thunder tympanic, God's thunder symphonic, God's thunder splits fire, God thunders, the wilderness quake, he makes the desert of Kadesh shake. It has a rhythm to it, and that's on purpose. The psalm is a metaphor about God coming to Jerusalem, and his coming is like the coming of a storm. That's why there's a lot of thunder and lightning imagery in the psalm. But it also helps if you pay attention to the geography, because the storm starts out over the waters, which is the Mediterranean from the psalmist's point of view, and it comes down off the water through Lebanon in the north, smashing the forests and making Mount Hermon jump like a wild kid goat. And as the storm grows closer and closer, it's not just distant thunder and lightning, it's a whirlwind and pelting rain, and in the midst of the storm, the worshiper falls to his knees and cries out, "Glory." And then he looks up through the seeming chaos of the storm, and he sees God's throne above it, and God sitting on it, ruling the world and giving his people peace. The psalm is designed so that every time a storm like this came to Israel, they would be reminded that God is on his throne above the flood. And it can serve like that for us as well. The next time the sea breezes conspire to bring the awesome kinds of thunderstorms that we get here in Central Florida, remember this psalm, and that God still sits enthroned above the thunderhead over the flood, and that he can still bring his people peace. God bless you. We'll see you Sunday at 10:15 for the live stream or in person in the sanctuary.